Good morning, good morning. It's Mondays with Tara and Andre. We will be starting in just a minute. Yay. Please say hello in the chat.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Andre.
Hey,
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, everyone.
It's live at 11:02.
Whoops. My phone is making noise. Whoops.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Here we are.
It's Mondays with Tara and Andre with Tara and Andre. I'm Tara. I'm a relationship and awesomeness coach.
And I'm Andre. I'm a sex-positive psychotherapist.
Please say hello in the chat. If you can drop a yes that you can hear and see us, that would be awesome. There was some weird message this morning that the camera or something wasn't working. So who knows? It's on vacation still.
But if you can hear us, drop us a chat. Drop us a line saying that you can hear us. But if they couldn't hear us, how would they do that? I guess they would drop one and say, "Well, I can't hear
us." I don't know.
Right.
All right. And let us know if you're watching us live, #live or #in the replay. So we have a fun-filled morning. We're going to talk about how we love the different types of non-monogamy.
Yeah. And boy, do we love.
Yeah. So for those of us who don't know us, we already introduced. Can you scroll that, please? We introduced ourselves at the beginning, but I'm Tara and this is Andre. We're the co-founders of the community Let's Talk Polyamory and of our group program, Open Relationship and Polyamory Mastery.
There's that too.
Yeah, so every week we come live here and do a training on all things polyamory, open relationships, and the like. And, you know, with the idea that we hope that you have an amazing relationship and experience, just like we do.
Yeah.
And those that we work with.
Yeah, we speak about those things, but we speak about whatever else is on your mind, right? Relating to how we relate to each other, how we identify our forms of expression.
Yeah.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about how we relate to each other, how we express that, and what types of relationships we might or might not have, right? And it'll be interesting to see because we just came off the heels of an amazing weekend where we were with some friends of ours, and it's interesting to see how we relate to them, but then how they relate to us and how they relate to others and how they do and they don't do those things and what their preferences are. So it's really cool to kind of pull back a little bit and look at the others, how they interact with each other and what styles we share and what styles we don't share, but still allow for and incorporate and appreciate. So
exactly.
Cool.
Well, it's also interesting, and you know how people use different terms and how they very specific around what they do and do not identify as. So, question for you in the comments, if you're watching live or in the replay: do you like having a label for the style, a label or identifier for the style of relationship you engage in? Yeah,
and I think we've said that many times before. And I feel that way, that I might want to resist labels or, getting put into these boxes. But at the same time, we might use these labels as kind of identifiers. They help to convey certain thoughts or expressions that we might have. And then we can say, well, I kind of relate to that. Like if we share the same idea of those things, that seems like it is helpful to identify those words. So maybe they're just identifiers and maybe not so much as hard, fast labels. And then at the same time, some people really do want to adhere to those and say, no, I am definitely this type of such and such, and they want to have those kind of labels. But it's interesting also to recognize, if I say that I am, a triangle, well, what type of triangle am I? And what is my understanding or definition of a triangle? Am I in a isosceles triangle? Right. So it's good to have.
I'm kind of a square.
No, you're more of a round hole.
Well, I think labels or identifiers are interesting as a starting point. But I think the key is, and why we're talking about this today, is that it's important to be clear on what your definition of that is, because people have different definitions of these various things. And so I think it doesn't matter which label or which identifier you're comfortable with, as long as you're communicating what that means to you.
Right, if you can. And it's great. If you have that clarity, and you might not, but talking about these things and creating dialogue like that, we might become more informed and be able to figure out, identify with that or I don't. But that being said, what's also kind of interesting, and we're going to go over different types of styles and formats of relating, how I feel as though we are often very plastic in those things. So we might subscribe or identify with certain traits at certain times and then others at other times.
Exactly.
But, yeah, the idea of, for example, like swinging comes to mind, right? We might sometimes be identified as swingers, and then at other times maybe we're less that and more of something else, like polyamorous or libertines or whatever it might be.
Right.
So we'll look at some of those differences.
Well, and you might be different things in different contexts or different people,
yeah.
And that's kind of the idea of relationship anarchy, which we're going to talk about as well during this. But so let's jump in. But the reason we're doing this is because it's the Toronto Pride Parade is just in just under a week, and we're going to be marching again. And so just a little, if you are going to be in the Toronto area, we'd love for you to join us. It's a free event. We are partnering with Polyamorous Living in Toronto, and we're marching and skating in the parade. We'll drop the link as well after, but it's up on screen right now. But we'll have a little pre-parade gathering at our place in the village and get ready and make up and,
But it's interesting though, marching in a pride parade as polyamorous, and some people take exception to that and say, well, it's not an identity, an identifier as your identity, as your sexual expression, your sexual identity rather. And some people are like, no, like it is a way of announcing ourselves as being perhaps different than the norm, but also wanting to feel included in that way. But I think I get out of jail free with my card that I feel as though I identify as queer, whatever that might mean, just being kind of left of center for me, right? In various things. So, if you don't like us marching there, that's unfortunate, but we will be there regardless. And we will be coming to you with open arms. And for me, it's so much about self-acceptance and inclusion of others, and including myself to be with others.
I love this picture.
You're shameless.
I know, but it was so good. It's such a great photo that someone captured of a beautiful moment in the parade last year where someone from, that was watching came and asked if they could hug you. And they just felt so, I don't know. I just feel like that's what it's about. So.
Yeah, it's so much about that feeling of love, right? We convey, we don't know each other, but yet we had this desire to connect, to see each other, to be experienced by each other. And that for me is a big part of Pride.
Yeah.
So it's pretty fantastic.
People are very much drawn to you during the parade. I noticed the parade and all the other events, people are wanting to take photos with you, and you have this presence about you, which I think is lovely.
I was wondering if I should write free hugs on my chest.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fun.
But I feel like I don't have to.
You don't have to. And they're like, can we take a picture? Can we hug you? Anyways.
Yeah. I'm so privileged that people would consider me that way. It's so wonderful. I wonder, is that difficult sometimes to ask for hugs if you're wanting it, need it? Because sometimes I know my own past experience, when I'm wanting it most, it might be most difficult to ask for that, but I might need it the most,
You asked me the other day for a hug.
I did. Yeah, I'm getting better at it.
Yeah, I love it.
I love it
hugs
too. And I ask my friends for hugs all the time.
Yeah. So since we're celebrating love, today's secret word is love.
Oh, beautiful.
And we have a free worksheet, which you can go through to look at what style of non-monogamy might work for you. And maybe it'd be an interesting exercise because there's a number of prompts and questions, which we'll go through really briefly at the end. But you can look at, what might work for you.
But, that's a great point. What might work for you and what might not work for you. And, we remain open. We always encourage people to try everything at least twice, right? So the first time you might have a negative experience, and then the second time it's reinforcing, say, okay, that's not for me. Or it might open your eyes to something else. Other way, there's a whole bunch of things, but remaining open to it. But also the idea that it may or may not be for us. And it's okay to say that, I'm wanting more of this or less of that. And it may fluctuate and change over time. So when we first started, I think we were very much monogamish, even though we were announcing that we wanted to be open, but we were having those traits. And then at certain points, we would interact with others and became kind of swinger-ish. And then at other times, we became polyamor-ish. And it's like, we don't have to declare that one saying, well, I am this or I am that, unless we want to, but we might also be open to see what resonates with us, what feels best, and then we can share that with others.
Yeah, and the other thing is it doesn't have to remain the same. It can change. I know sometimes people come into the group and they answer the questions and they say like what the issue is that's going on with them, and sometimes it's that they accepted one style of non-monogamy and they don't want that style anymore. They want something different and find it hard to talk about that. And that's why relationship reviews are super important. But we've gone off a little track. So wanting to know from you in the comments, do you like to identify in a certain way? And if you do, or if you identify multiple identifiers, what are they? So if you're open to sharing that, that would be awesome.
But that's such a great point too, right? Because it really speaks to what we're saying. Do you like to identify in a certain way? And you maybe feel more comforted, more secure in saying, well, I'm this type of person. I like to relate like this. And other people may just be the opposite and say, no, I don't want to be defined that way. It depends on the case by case, person by person basis. And either one and both are perfectly fantastic and acceptable. Or any blend of those.
Exactly. Okay, so we've shown this diagram before. So here it is. I just like this because of how it groups the different styles of relationships, all the way from monogamy to monogamish. And they talk about them in terms of from high to low sexual exclusivity. So that's the top to the bottom, high at the top and low at the bottom. And then from high emotional exclusivity on the left to low emotional exclusivity, and groups them in these sort of quadrants as a way of sort of understanding where they fit. And then the closer they are to the one side, the closer they are to the other part. So let's start on the top left-hand corner, because that seems to make sense. So this is the ones that have the highest sexual exclusivity and the highest emotional exclusivity.
And monogamy comes up first. And let's not be booing. Don't yuck other people's yum.
No.
I'm joking. Monogamy is a wonderful thing, right?
Yes.
If it works for you, that's beautiful. And there are many forms of monogamy, as we're going to go into also. But we're talking about the purest form right now, where we take these vows explicitly or purposely that say we will only be each other's emotional or physical or sexual partners, and that's it. And it works well for some people, and other people it seems to work less well. And I think one of the reasons why it might work less well is because they may not be having the same ability to communicate openly, because open relating invites open communication to be done well, right?
Yes.
Right. So it's all about communication.
But the thing I want to say about monogamy, because you were kind of going on and on.
Well, thank you.
In a good way, is it's usually two people. You said something about vows, so I just wanted to say that you don't necessarily have to have vows. People could be in a committed monogamous relationship and not take any particular vows, but there may be an understanding, or explicit or implicit, that you will only be exclusive to each other, and anything outside of that is considered cheating. So that's the differentiation I wanted to kind of make in terms of monogamy.
So when you were in monogamous one-on-one relationships in the past, did you guys ever get to a point where you said, okay, like, should we go exclusive? Like, was it announced that you were no longer seeing other people? Was it a threshold that you crossed over? Was it a conversation that was had?
Well, I mean, I have done that before in relationships. Most recent of which, when I did that before I met you, when I said, like, what's going on with us? Are we going somewhere? Because you're thinking about the relationship escalator, the whole tennis thing. You only play tennis with one person, and then, you carry on. And they said, oh yeah, we're friends with benefits. And I was like, what? Oh, I was shocked. This is before I realized that non-monogamy was a fit for me. But yeah, I don't know. That's why I said sometimes it's explicit and sometimes it's implicit.
Sure.
So,
well, I mean, with the marriage contract, it's kind of
it's explicit.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like you're vowing in front of other people. You're having a marital contract, right? It's a document that's signed. I mean, it's really like, and it's one of the tenets of it, right? I mean, you are swearing off others.
Yeah. So we got into knowing that we weren't going to be monogamous through a conversation before we got to the point where it seemed like we had to make some sort of decision. We actually made a decision to be non-monogamous. No, you and I.
Oh, yeah.
You and I.
Did we before actually make that conversation that we're going to be non-monogamous?
No, it happened when we decided what we were interested in.
But that was a sexual fantasy.
Started with a sexual fantasy, but it came early enough in the relationship that we didn't get to the point where
we hadn't entered onto a relationship escalator yet.
Right. We were still fairly new. It was in the first month of being together. So.
Serendipitous.
And here we are now talking about it.
Years later.
So let's move to monogamish. So this is when you're mostly monogamish, but not monogamous. But there's a bit of an ish. So maybe there's times when you like special occasions where you're mostly sexually and emotionally exclusive, except maybe periodic engagements, maybe when you're on vacation or like together, or things that you agree to together. One-time hookups, vacations apart. You may have some agreements where once in a while you may be non-exclusive.
I'm thinking about it
together or apart.
I'm thinking about it from the other side, because we announce ourselves to be very polyamorous or very open, right? Ethically open, and we are at times swingers. And I think that for me, it feels as though that is an innate quality of mine, that I am a social butterfly in those ways. But then I feel at times, like when you come to nest with me, we become monogamish. So we go from being open and polyamorous to being more monogamish, and we take on those roles, right? Like, I'm driving the truck, you're cooking the food, and we've got that very traditional way about us. Except that we're kind of like on a little kinky flavoring there.
A kinky flavoring, a little spice to it, yeah.
But I mean, the point being that monogamish can go either way. So you could be monogamous and then dabble, or you can be rather polyamorous or open and then come into these conventions. Well, no, but come into these more traditional kind of roles. Yeah.
And I think that happened to some people during the pandemic, right? Like forced monogamy, monogamish, that sort of thing.
They said it was hard to go out and find people. There a lot of places were shut down, so it was difficult to go out and ask people for a coffee or a drink or something. And then even just availing themselves to these things, people were kind of retreated back in their caves. So it was forcing a lot of people to be kind of monogamish in that way.
And then the last one in this quadrant is polyfidelity. Polyfidelity. So that's where there's more than two people, and that are exclusive, mostly exclusive, I would say, to each other. They're generally closed to outside additional partners. So sometimes compared to polygamy without marriage. But an example of this people may be familiar with is a closed polycule. So where there's a group of people and they're sort of a unit, and they're together, but they're closed to outside groups. But not all polycules are. Some polycules are open to other relationships. They have various forms, but that can be a form of polyfidelity.
I was seeing more polycules during the pandemic. That people were like, okay, like this person is relatable, acceptable. We know them, so we'll bring them into our little circle.
Your bubble, as they call it,
exactly.
The bubble.
So it's like, we're open about exploring with each other, but we're closed in that we're not accepting outsiders into our polycule.
Yeah, we sort of had a bit of that during the pandemic. We had a couple parties and stuff, and we had a group of people that we felt comfortable with that got tested.
Yeah,
and that
you're
sort of
vetted
thing.
in a way, right?
Yeah. So that's the top corner. So now let's drop down to the bottom, which is still on the more emotionally exclusive side, but varying ranges of sexual exclusivity. So starting with swinging, because it's the farthest over. So swinging is where it's usually two people that are engaging in mostly, I'd say, emotional involvement is kept more to a minimum, and it's more a sexual thing. So we say usually because there can be friendships, there could be strong connections with people. But often it's where people swinging a unit does things together. Right. So you and I might go to a club or meet another couple or go to a party and we do things together. It's usually with two people, I would say.
But with usually a very low emotional investment in each other. Right? Yes. In fact, it might be the thing that they are wanting to do most is let's make sure that you and I are well connected first before going to these swing events. And then we'll swing physically, but we're not going to look to create dates outside of the swing event or things like that. So we remain very closed in that sense, emotionally and protected. And then they go out. And it's interesting to me, the idea of labels and the expression of whether we're swingers or polyamorous and that, because, we're indicating that it's high sexual exchange, low emotional exchange. And we have a couple that we
not super high, but it's not like it's less partners. It's still, it's more sexual. Sorry. I didn't mean to correct you.
But what I was going to say is I know of a couple that we love very much and who love us very much on many levels.
A few couples.
But I'm thinking of one couple in particular because when we talk about polyamory, they're quick to say, well, we're not polyamorous. We swing on occasion, but we're not polyamorous. And yet we see them in many different circumstances, and we've told them we love them, and they told us they love us. And some of it, to me, feels as though it goes beyond simply swinging. But I'm not going to impose my ideals or titles on them. If they want to identify as, blue elephants, then hey, you're a blue elephant to me. But it feels to me much more as though it is a strong emotional investment.
And here, I like in Quebec, instead of calling it swinging, they call them libertins.
Or exchanges.
Or sometimes people call it lifestyle. But generally with swinging and libertin and all those things is the partners do not date outside the relationships.
Oh, there's that too.
But like you said, I mean, we have strong emotional connections with them. They're like our good friends, you know, and we had a whole table, like this table here is still set for 8 because 7, I guess we had 7 people here that we know and love and have friendships with, but we've also had sex with every single one of them.
You know, it's great. There was going to be room for 8, but then one person, their partner was working, so they came up alone, which is wonderful because I feel that unfortunately sometimes single people are not as well received in that, and that's a whole nother topic for us. But you know, how do you come into it when you are a single person as opposed to being coupled? Because a lot of this is, you know, a lot of people feel safer when the person's coming in as a couple than when they're coming as an individual.
Exactly. Yeah. So the next one is, and I'm going to show a different diagram this time because I like to show this one as the transition that people often go from when they first begin, right? So from monogamy to swinging to what we're going to talk about now, which is open relationship, open marriage, over to polyamory. But let's start with open relationship and sort of the difference between swinging. I think it's more in the short part of it is when you're in a relationship and you no longer are just exclusive to each other. You actually date outside the relationship, date other people. So you can form sexual and or emotional relationships. I think generally, usually, when people are in open relationships, the idea is that this is still your unit, your primary relationship, and that the other ones are more like secondary or satellites or that sort of thing. And there's less of an emotional connection. Typically,
you use the word secondary. My ears perked up because some people really, you know, especially relationship anarchists, are really not wanting to have it in any kind of hierarchy or political way, and yet, you know, maybe it is one of those labels that makes it seem, and hierarchy meaning not that the person secondary, not that they're in any way not good enough to be primary. It's just a question of how much time or where on that level hierarchy do they fall, right? But I don't know that we necessarily have to subscribe to it if we're not wanting to. It makes me think of my having 2 primary partners, and some people would say, well, that's not possible. How could you, you know, primary indicates the first. How could you have 2 first? But anyway, that I think is going to have to be left for a whole nother talk.
But I think generally I'd say more limited sexual emotional involvement for some, but I think it depends on when people are first starting and opening a relationship. Typically that's the way it is, and the idea is that you're limiting it, the emotional connection, in order to be more protective of the unit.
So we still have this, and then we'll go out and we'll have some of that.
Which is, I think, why part of what we talk about in a program, that when we talk about making agreements, is having those sorts of agreements that make you feel secure without having to have those particular limitations. And were you going to just say, well, I know what you're going to say.
Do you? You know what I was going to say?
No, maybe.
Interesting. Let's hear it.
I thought you were going to talk about what's more important, emotional or sexual. What's more threatening for some people. Well, some people it's emotional, and some people it's the sexual.
So in a way, you kind of were going to what I was, you did pick up on what I was going to put down. And I was wondering, looking back at my own experience, what was more threatening? Where did my issues of jealousy come up the most? Was it when you and I happened to be first opening up and might have been in a threesome and my watching you with somebody else? Or was it when we started to really open up and started to date, individuals independent of each other? And what feelings brought up, what feelings were brought up then? What was my level of jealousy in either one? And those are 2 fantastic breeding grounds for your jealousy to come up if you've not, processed it, if you've not worked through it. But it is survivable if you do work through it, if you communicate openly about it, and you do look at where it's coming up and what's, what is coming up for you, and how might you move beyond just those initial feelings of jealousy.
So, what, in terms of how you feel now, what do you have? If you were going to be more insecure in a certain situation, are you more insecure when I'm not with you, or when I'm with you?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think the feelings of insecurity might both be possible, might both be present, but for different reasons. So if you're with me and I'm watching it, I might do the compare and despair and think that, well, for whatever reason, they're more fantastic and I'm less than.
Okay.
And in the other case, when I don't see it, well, then my imagination might lend itself to say, well, I could imagine them having this wonderful time. But both ways, they're simply feelings and not necessarily facts, right? So
Yes.
I can become observant of that, and then I can kind of start to explore them and figure out, well, where is this feeling coming from? And what is really driving it? And what is the demonstration? And the demonstration truly is that we do have a great relationship. We do talk often and we do communicate these things. And I can trust you to be there and talk about my feelings and thoughts and stuff. So I needn't let my fears of jealousy or the fears of insecurity or being less than run away and create the entire picture. It's just not so. I can invite myself to be curious about what is going on and then start to look at what might be some of the possible causes and what might be some of the solutions and remedies to that.
Yeah, exactly what we talk about,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
And I think that's the thing you need to, if you understand it, then you can work through it. Because often I think when people first open up a relationship or become even swingers or polyamorous, whatever you choose, that's the thing that people get stuck on is that security. And then they typically make rules around them that they think will make them feel safe and secure. And they actually don't really work.
No.
So it's dealing with what those insecurities are, where are they coming from, and then creating agreements on how you will value your relationship as you go forward. Our values-based agreements, which I think is awesome.
But you're absolutely right. So much of it is fear-based, right? And a lot of it is due to the unknown. And we very often want to turn from that and run away or put up these big defenses or even become somewhat aggressive about them and try and extinguish them or create these provisions like rules and things. And there are alternatives, healthier alternatives to that.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too, and I know people coming in the group, again, questions people answer is sometimes there's a comfort with yourself going out and doing something, but then not necessarily with your partner. And so sometimes that makes it difficult for the partners to say, as me, I'm like, oh, I'm super comfortable doing all this stuff and I feel great about it, but I'm not really comfortable about you doing those things. But that totally happens. Like someone just came in the group yesterday that was the thing that they were struggling with, right? And it's so common. It's like, because we get in our minds, we go like, oh, this is such an exciting idea. Imagine the experiences I'm going to have. And then you're like enjoying them, but then you're like, oh my God, my partner's doing the same thing.
Well, that's exactly what happened when I came out to my father as being polyamorous, right? So, he's like, at first he's like, what? Like, you're allowed to cheat? And I said, well, no, that's the ethical part. Like, it's not cheating. We announced this to each other and we're able to do it. And he's like, wow. So basically a license to go out and have an affair or cheat, I guess. And after a moment, it settled in the idea to him, and he's like, well, wait a second, then she gets to do that too? And it was like, it seemed kind of threatening to him that well, it's okay for me to do it, but I wouldn't want my partner necessarily doing it. Well, maybe then he would be better solo poly.
And maybe don't ask, don't tell. That's how some people get into don't ask, don't tell situations as well, as they decide to open up, but they don't want to know anything.
Right.
Because they think, again, that it's going to protect themselves. But then you can create these wildly fantastical stories.
Maybe, but it doesn't, it's not, again, negating on the possibility of being a don't ask, don't tell. Maybe if that works for you, that's perfectly fantastic. But the one thing we really do advocate for is that both parties know about don't ask, don't tell. So it's not as though you're in a closed marriage and, well, I'm going to go out and decide for myself to be don't ask, don't tell, and I'll do everything, and I just won't come and ask my partner if they're okay with it or tell them about what's happening. No, that's not it at all. It's the idea that maybe you don't want to have to know the details and maybe you don't have to, but that it should be consensual on both, all parts, right?
Yeah.
All 3 or 4 or 5 people involved should know about it.
Yeah. Okay, now we're going to move over to the other side of the bottom left quadrant, which is where polyamory falls into.
Yay.
And poly being many and amory being love.
Yeah, so it's quite literally from the Greek translation, meaning many loves.
Right.
How beautiful.
Yeah. So this is where there's multiple romantic and or sexual relationships with people. The investment is generally more high. So higher than casual one night stands, I'd say. So people, the difference between generally, usually, open relationship and polyamory is I think that there's this idea that there's going to be ongoing, sustained relationships.
And high emotional investment.
And higher emotional investment. Having said that, like we said, we have friends that identify as being in an open relationship, swingers, and I feel like we still have a very high emotional investment with them. So it's all up to you, whatever you think. I'm so curious actually what people think about these differentiations. So often the intention though with polyamory is that these are ongoing. I think that's sort of the difference. Maybe sometimes open relationships, it's not necessarily meant to be ongoing, but I mean,
maybe. I don't know about that. I mean, friends with benefits could be ongoing, right?
Well, we're talking about that next.
Okay.
So there's a few different,
well, I was just going to say again, we started off talking about labels and identifiers, and I might identify as polyamorous, but I also identify as a swinger, and I also identify as and these other things. So they needn't be exclusive. And because you are polyamorous today doesn't mean that you have to be tomorrow or any of those things, right? So it's really just about your own comfort levels. But these are really descriptors in trying to help each other find traits that we have in common, or areas where we say, well, no, that's not really my jam, and that's cool for you, but it's just different. So it helps. It helps. Really, it's all, at the end of the day, it's all about communication. Trying to invite dialogue and communication, transparency. Yeah.
So there's a few different types of polyamory. So there's hierarchical. And this is generally where there's some relationships may be more important than others. So you may have what you refer to as a primary or an anchor partner. And, I know some people poo-poo the idea of hierarchy in polyamory, but if it works for you and if everything is consensual, all your partners are aware of this situation and they're in agreement with the conditions of those relationships, then I think it can be fine. I think it's really, for me, it's really hard to completely remove the hierarchy in relationships just by circumstance, right?
But it makes me think also, I was speaking to a relationship anarchist the other day, and they were like, well, I don't necessarily like the terms of those things, but I do understand that if you had somebody in your life and they were in need of something, regardless of the hierarchy, you would probably go to that person because they're in need. And hopefully your partners would say, they wouldn't object and say, well, they're lower on the ladder or whatever. So there's circumstances where they lend themselves, where the hierarchy goes out the window.
For sure. And if you're married and have kids with someone, it's really hard not for that relationship not to be important. But I think if you are in this situation and you are engaging with others, it's important, like you said, to have those people to have importance at times as well. You're not just like the second thought, or when you have free time, or if they needed something, you'll be like, oh, that's, or if, this is a common one too, like something's happening, maybe a primary partner feels jealous and then you cancel the date. You know what I mean? Like there has to be some consideration in these sorts of things. So I'm curious what people think about that. I think that's the difference. And I think the reason people get worked up about hierarchy is this idea of couples privilege. So particularly if you're wanting to bring, there's like where there's a power imbalance. So maybe there's one person coming into the relationship, like a unicorn or a someone who's solo polyamory, and where they fit within it. And that, you behave as a we rather than an individual.
And for that very reason, a lot of people will not date people who are a couple, right? Because they feel that there will always be that imbalance, that special consideration for. And some people might actually prefer it because they also say, well, it takes a lot of the expectation and responsibility off of me. If I'm dating somebody who's in a couple, I know that they have somebody else, so I don't have to feel as though I am their go-to person.
And I think, and I think in those situations, if it's three people and two of them happen to be more of in a primary relationship, it's, making sure that you have your individual relationships with each other, rather than just the two on the one. You know what I mean? It makes it less couples privilegey. So then there's non-hierarchical, which would be there's no importance with there's no imposing of hierarchies or importance or ranking. Everybody gets a seat at the table. And then there's solo polyamory. So you're an individual person who chooses your relationships and as they go, and you don't enter necessarily into a couple or a triad or other formal thing. And so the other one we added to, which wasn't part of Jessica Fern's, is this friends with benefits. And I added that because we were was talking with a client, and I think people can have friends with benefits has different views. And it can be where there's no friends with benefits. It's like you have someone you see occasionally where you have high sexual involvement, but maybe low emotional, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. Like the person that said to me that I said, when I asked them where we were going, and they said with friends with benefits, and I was like shocked. Now I'm like, consider them a very, very close friend. We became best friends. And so we're best friends, and we do have sex sometimes. So for me, there's a very high emotional connection and and at times, not anymore, but a higher sexual thing. So
I'm so curious to know who this person is.
You know who it is.
You have so many.
Oh, shush. So, and then it's important, and this is why it's important again to clarify definitions, because some people have a very different definition of what friends with benefits is. It's just like, it might be very casual, very informal. Well, other people is like, no, friends, like my friends are important to me. They're my family. They're the most important people in my life.
It's so interesting. As you said, somehow it triggered a memory about years ago. I was seeing somebody and I thought we were casual, and then it turned out, no, we were boyfriend, girlfriend without my knowing it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And how quickly did you get out of that relationship?
No, it took a while.
Okay.
Yeah, but I never defined it. I guess I was just having a good time dating them. And then they threw out the term, our being boyfriend, girlfriend. I was a little taken back. I thought we were more, friends with benefit. So it's interesting, but it's also good to talk about these things, right? So we can make sure we're on the same page and manage each other's expectations or responsibilities, things like that.
Exactly. And so then we'll move over to relationship anarchy, which is kind of considered the farthest away, people say, from monogamy. And I think there's differing views of relationship anarchy. Right. It's the style that sort of seeks to dismantle any sort
Some
of...
would say. Yeah.
Some would say.
It's an active, hierarchies. That's an active verb, right? To
dismantle.
Yeah.
Dismantle hierarchies. I still think it's really hard to have every relationship be equal. But I think the idea with relationship anarchy is that you're not making distinctions between friends and lovers and family, and you're not reserving intimacy to people that you have sex with. And so what I like about relationship anarchy, and I think in some ways, I think we encapsulate this part of that concept, is the idea that you're co-creating your relationship. So every relationship is different, and you're deciding what aspects you want in that relationship. Like, do you want more friendship? Do you want more sex? Do you want more things? And people often refer to the what's called, oh, look, that's funny, we're in the background, the relationship anarchy smorgasbord, which was developed by Max Hill. This isn't a great photo, but if you Google relationship anarchy smorgasbord, you'll find this. And basically it's an idea where you're choosing the types of things you're involved with. Like, is there caregiving? Is there religion? Is there sex? Is there romance? And what those are like. And it's a smorgasbord, and you're choosing those things. So that's the idea.
Yeah, great.
Of that one, relationship anarchy.
Yeah, it's a great diagram.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
About?
Relationship anarchy.
Well, I like the idea that it's co-creating. I think that's fantastic. But I think you can find that in monogamy as well. Hopefully it's all through communication, right? It always comes back to the same thing about having the willingness and ability to talk openly and honestly about our thoughts and feelings, and find out how it's going to be accepted or intolerated by others. And where can we find that overlap that works for us? And what can we announce those things that are working less well for us so that we could find a better way? Yeah, so from monogamy to anarchy, it's all possible.
Yeah, I think that this idea of co-creating is like, for me, the basis of consensual non-monogamy. If everyone's going to be consenting to non-monogamy, then you're co-creating what your agreements are, what your relationship is with each person or each group of people. You know what I mean? And everybody has a say, and everybody makes a decision based on that. Like, that's why we have different relationships with different people, and why they have a different relationship with us than they may have with other people. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And so the last two are in the upper right corner, where there's higher sexual exclusivity and lower emotional exclusivity, which is polyintimates and polyamorous and asexual. So polyintimates is an interesting term. I'm going to cheat, because it's when you're exclusive with one partner, but not emotionally romantically exclusive in traditional mono ways. So you may have relationships with others that you're non-sexual with, which are super important to you and that you have super high levels of emotional connection with and investment and involvement, but they don't fit traditional conventions. So you may have a boyfriend that you're monogamous with, for example, but you may have a friend or partner that you're emotionally exclusive with. So you have that sort of situation. You're sort of in between that and polyamorous and asexual.
Right. Yeah. I have an ongoing relationship with a partner who we were very sexual and very romantic with, and now we are rather asexual, although we are intimate still, but kind of asexual, but we have a very high level of emotional investment in each other.
Yeah. So you're non-sexual mostly, but you are very, very close emotionally. And some people would find that to be outside the norm of monogamy, but they have a monogamous partner. They identify more as monogamous.
They do and they don't, because their partner, my metamor, is aware of who I am and their relationship to me. So they're polyamorous in that sense, or they're rather open in that sense, in that they are acknowledging that there is another person, and the other person is forthcoming and saying, I have this other person who we have a deep, profound, and rather intimate relationship. So it needn't be defined simply by the sexual expression, but it is the romantic and emotional expressions as well.
Right. And then that's why there's sort of this last category of polyamorous and asexual, which is where people may identify as asexual, so they don't experience sexual attraction, but there's
or sexual demonstration. They might be sexually attracted,
right?
But maybe not demonstrating.
Not demonstrating, but are still romantically attracted.
Right.
So you may have multiple romantic, emotional, strongly emotional connections, and be polyamorous in that way, but there's not as much of it's more of an asexual expression.
Yeah. So that's the person that we're talking about there, right? So they are sexually interactive with their primary partner, with their partner,
their monogamous
their
partner,
boyfriend.
Their boyfriend.
I don't want to define their relationship with them, but yeah, they're
generally a boyfriend. Yeah.
And yet they are emotionally involved with me as well.
Yeah, which can cause some issues.
Well, it's also delightful as well.
Yes.
Okay. I was thinking about it, right? We got together with a couple of couples, but in the couples, very often when we do get together with those couples, and they are there's like a balance, like two of them and two of us.
Yeah.
I find that very often I relate to their partner and you relate to their partner.
Yes.
And what I relate to in their partner are the things that are not present in you. And the things that you are relating to them are the things that are not present to me. So it's one of the benefits. So say, for example, creativity over being practical or being analytical.
Practical and analytical and planning and
exactly. So I'm none of those things, or very little of those things, and yet you get the wonders of those things. You get to enjoy those things on occasion, but then you come back to the other part. Anyway, it's just interesting the way that it's offset, and I think that happens in many relationships. So for me, being with my other primary and being with you, I think the two of you are so very different that it's wonderful for me, because I get to enjoy all the benefits of where you have those strong traits, and then I go to them and I have all the benefits of those strong traits, and it makes for a beautiful balance in that way when it works well. On the other side, I also get your other side and I get their other side, and sometimes the gods create that snare at the same time. It's a perfect storm, but it comes with the territory.
Well, I'm smiling because this does happen, and I'm so curious if people want to put in the comments if this happens to you as well. If you do date and you date, like, say, couples, for example. So we have friends that are couples, and we typically, I find we typically go to when we meet a couple, we typically go to the person, we have a stronger connection with the person that's more like ourselves. Almost every couple that was here, we do go to the person that's more like us, which is ourselves, which is funny. It's like you're looking for the mirror of yourself. I don't know. But maybe you're just looking for different than your partner, or maybe you're just, I don't know. It's just so interesting. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, we'll have to look at it.
So then how do you determine what styles for you? We're not going to go into detail on this because this week's worksheet, which is what style of non-monogamy is right for me, is perfect for you to ask yourself these questions. So you can drop love in the comments, drop love, and we'll send you the link to download it. So we'll just quickly run through those questions. So what makes me want to be monogamous? What am I excited about? What am I worried about? how emotionally exclusive would I like to be? And so that'll help place you on that map. Scroll.
What?
Yep.
What am I reading?
How sexually exclusive would I like to be is number 5. And then, there was 5 things. I think it was 6 questions. And then, and then from there, you can answer those questions and think about what are your next steps to make sure this is a reality and that everyone is on the same page. So even if you've already opened up a relationship, you've already been polyamorous, it's good to kind of ask yourself these questions, because your why will help inform what style you want to be. Like, what are you trying to get out of it? So then when you know that, you can then say, okay, what kinds of conversations do I need to have with current or potential partners? What kind of agreements do I need to make? What are my personal boundaries that I would like to have? And then what sort of systems and things are you going to put into place to make you feel this to go smoothly for you? And that sounds very process oriented, but it's actually a good way to kind of step by step it out when you're first starting, or if you're looking at changing something in your relationship. Because I think this is a reality for many people, right? They start with maybe swinging, and then the tricky part, I think, for people is moving from swinging to open relationship and then over to polyamory. I think that's sort of the hardest transition to make. And so these things are good to really figure out in order to determine how you're going to make it work for you. So
they're tricky without that conversation, right? Without that open communication. And that's exactly what we're talking about, is finding ways of creating that dialogue.
Yeah.
But it's not only for the newbies, because I see ourselves in that, 5, 6, 7 years later, however long it's been, that, there's things that come up that I want to speak about and see, can we make modifications here or there? How do we maintain this? Whatever it is, both good and bad. And it's wonderful to always keep the channels of communication open, right? It's not as though it's ever done.
Yeah.
We always continue to.
Well, that's why you have relationship reviews and check-ins. So reviews being the bigger reviews using our radar, which is like radar, but with an extra A. And then check-ins are usually more frequent, like, hey, how are things going? Is there anything you want to talk about? And having those moments where you look at where you are, where you want to be, and if what you're doing is working for you. And maybe you need to shift your agreements. Maybe you can lighten up in some areas, make things a little more free, a little more open with comfort. But it's an ongoing process, I think, right? Yeah.
And I think it's great to be able to do these check-ins, because even if things are going really well today, maybe down the road something comes up. And if we haven't had these kind of check-ins in a while, maybe it makes it difficult to announce them. Whereas if we do them on a regular basis, how are things going? How are we doing in this department, that department? Well, if something should come up, then it's easier. It's that, that on-ramp to the avenue is already created for us, and it's there. So a little while ago, I was feeling very monogamish, and was feeling a little, questioning, I call myself polyamorous or being an open relationship, and yet it felt as though we were in the trappings of monogamy, and not there's anything wrong with it, but it wasn't quite where I had set out to be, and I wanted to talk to you about it. And it was easy to do it because we talk often about our relationships. So it was quite easy to look at that and then find solution to it. And lucky me, you weren't taking it as though, am I not enough for you? Or is this, and you didn't personalize it, which is wonderful. It really was, let's look at what the elements are here that are creating these thoughts and feelings. And then we can course correct if necessary, or we can simply acknowledge them and, keep an eye on them, whatever it was.
Yeah, so it felt like we were a little more on the escalator, and we wanted to step off, right? And so these reviews and check-ins give you an opportunity to do that. I think what they also do, which is what we talk about in our program, it's one of the modules, module 6, is relationship reviews and check-ins. What's important is that, especially if you're first opening up, or if you're doing that transition to something that's a bit less emotionally exclusive, it allows you not to have the conversation all the time. Because I think that's what people get stuck in, is like they open up a relationship and then they're like, oh my God, all we're doing is talking and fighting about the situation. Like, it's like it fills every moment. It sucks up all the air. And then it doesn't allow you to enjoy the experience.
Like, why did I get into this?
And then you're like, why the hell? This is terrible. So so that's our little pitch for doing reviews.
Well, it might feel like all we're doing is talking, and like, why did I get into this? It's a bit of a drag, but it is the basis from which you might go forward and have a much more fulfilling, rewarding, and less entangled experience, right?
Yeah.
With a lot less headache. Yeah.
But you can do that when you start from a position where you feel emotionally comfortable, is you're not escalated. It's not an escalation situation where emotions are really high and you're trying to have a serious conversation about, why you feel shitty about your partner going out on a date or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, that's the other thing we teach is like the communication and attunement communication and how it's so important how you talk.
Sure. And I was just going to say, it might be foreign to you initially, right? It might not be from where you're coming from to speak in these ways or to have that kind of communication formula to adhere to. But once you do learn it and it becomes integrated, becomes second nature, it makes it so much easier. So it's like anything else. It's like a lot of practice, but the openness and willingness to consider it, because I've learned that with you, and it's really brought our communication patterns to the whole next level.
Yeah, and we had a bit of a bump not too long ago. We actually talked about it a couple of weeks ago, and we've recovered, right? Because we have that foundation, and I think that's the point: is building the strong foundation. Because I think when you have that, it's so much easier to get through the rough bits that are likely to happen, and that's true of like monogamous relationships. If you built the same foundation, I think you would be much stronger. So it's not exclusive to being non-monogamous. These things that we talk about. Communication, jealousy, insecurity, agreements, reviews, they're all they're the same components. They're transferable.
Yeah. So. And I mean, they can be taken to your professional relationships or your relationships with your family, right? Because I think back, and I don't have to think back very far, to how many times that something was unfolding and I just didn't know how to express it or feel comfortable enough to express it. So I kind of simply went along with it or just tried to minimize it. And that wasn't good for me or for them, but really it wasn't serving me well. And now I feel as though I'm much more comfortable in announcing when things are not the way I want them to be or how I want them to be.
Yeah, I find learning a new style of communication is really helping with my conversations with my parents and knowing, timing, tone, and turf, and really implementing those things and, the nonviolent communication and all of that stuff. So knowing when to speak to them and how to say it.
And how to listen.
And how to listen to them. It's like, what is she really saying when she's saying this, and then asking, it's been transformative, I think, for me too, personally. So anyways, communication. So
I'm glad we kept this to be a short one today.
I know. We said, let's keep it short, 51 minutes later. So if you want today's worksheet, what style of consensual non-monogamy is right for me, drop love in the chat. Drop love. And don't forget, we're doing Pride Parade in less than a week, this coming Sunday. It's a free event, pre-gathering at our place in the village. I'll make sure I drop the link, or if you drop Pride in the comments, I'll send you a personal message with the link. And then if you ever want to talk about, the style of non-monogamy that's for you, or if you're having some issues in your own relationship, we can help you. So reach out to chat and just send me a DM. I'm still offering a pay what you can coaching session with me, and gives you a chance to get a taste of coaching and talk about some pressing thing that's going on in your life.
One more word about Pride before we go.
Yeah.
It is, again, not exclusive to people who identify under the LGBTQ2IA plus banner, but even for allies, right? So you needn't declare yourself. Nobody's going to be checking your papers at the door.
No.
If you want to come and be loving and supportive, then by all means, please come and join us.
Yeah. We'd love to. It was a blast last year. And
every year's been a blast.
Oh yeah.
So
even
love,
during the pandemic when there was no parade, we did our own thing. It was super fun. So we'd love to have you. We'd love to meet you in person.
Good vibes.
And hang out and have a good time. So join us. And that's it for today. Yay. Okay.
Right,
love and pride, everyone. Have a great Monday.
Bye.
Bye.